Twilight's World, written by Groucho Pony, read by No One and Nobody.
Chapter 14. Mike. Riding in the truck with Mike, Twilight observed the passing scenery with great interest. She had not been able to observe very much during their outings of the previous evening. It had been too dark, and her argument with Mike about cosmology had been distracting. From the moment the truck had left the house, it appeared to be traveling on a gravel road. Twilight noted with interest, not that she was any expert in any such matters, how smooth and broad it was. Equestrian roads typically became rutted by all the cart travel, but there was no such signs of any ruts in this road.
Oof! There aren't any ruts in the road, but they sure do have holes in them. Why are there holes in the road?
She asked.
Those are called potholes. They are formed when a section of the road's surface gets weakened by pooling water. The weight of passing vehicles displaces materials starting a hole. Over time, the hole increases in size.
Twilight wrote down the information in her notepad. There was no chance that she would ever leave the notepad behind. The truck reached the crossroads she remembered they had come to last night. As it made the expected left turn, Twilight noted how the road's surface was different from the gravel road.
This road is smoother than the one we were just on. It's a lot smoother. And am I seeing lines painted on the road?
She exclaimed.
It's still basically the same as the last road,
Mike answered.
Only now they've added an asphalt cap on top of the gravel base. The lines are used to inform vehicles when it's unsafe to attempt to pass another vehicle.
Asphalt? Unsafe?
She asked.
Asphalt is a name we have for a crude form of pitch. What you see on the road here is a mixture of asphalt and gravel.
Pitch I know about. It's a byproduct from burning wood to make charcoal. They must have used quite a lot of wood to be able to cap this entire road.
Twilight did not pursue that issue. In truth, she was not all that interested in the construction of roads. The passing scenery was too distracting. Mike, on the other hand, continued answering her questions.
If you study the lines, you might notice that they are broken when you have a sufficient line of sight to be able to see oncoming traffic, should you be attempting to pass a vehicle in front of you. A solid line simply means do not cross, though that may be due to a variety of reasons.
It's hard to imagine why they would need such a system. Just stay out of the way of other vehicles,
Twilight concluded, though she did begin to observe the lines on the road, trying to verify Mike's words. The mystery of the lines was soon revealed, however. Their truck was just cresting a hill when another vehicle coming from the opposite direction crested the hill as well. Within seconds, both vehicles passed each other at a fairly high speed. Twilight suddenly saw the wisdom behind the road lines. After they had passed the hill, they found themselves passing between stands of what looked like pine trees. As they progressed further, the trees fell away, revealing open fields interspersed with occasional sets of buildings.
Are these farms?
Twilight wondered, observing a common pattern in the layout. A house, rather similar to Mike's house, was always situated closest to the highway. Then, further back, were several larger outbuildings.
Is Mike a farmer? He did mention something about growing up on a farm.
Twilight looked over at him, but he seemed to be fully engrossed with controlling the truck.
Mike?
Twilight asked, drawing his attention.
Tell me about yourself. I mean, here I am, a pony that you've given a place to stay. You've cared for me, fed me, and given me a bed to sleep in. Mike, you have repeatedly made promises to help me, and I thank you for all that. But I really know nothing about you at all.
Mike drew in a breath and blew it out again. He lifted his right hand off the mushroom, brushing it through his mane.
That's a pretty boring subject, Twilight. I'm sure that you don't...
Please, Mike.
Twilight interrupted him.
Please tell me something about yourself.
Well, I really don't know where to start.
He blew another breath through his pursed lips.
How about you just tell me what you do? You must have a special talent. Every pony does.
I can't say that I do. I don't have any particular talent, Twilight.
What do you mean you don't have any particular talent? You have a cutie mark, don't you?
QT mark? What's that?
Mike brought the truck to a stop in the middle of the road. Hanging suspended in the air in front of Mike's truck, Twilight saw a peculiar device with 3 circles in it. One of them was glowing red.
A cutie mark. You know, one of these.
Twilight used her left foreleg to place a hoof on her left flank. Mike glanced over.
Oh, that. Well, I just thought that was some kind of body art, Twilight. And no, I've never been inclined towards getting myself tattooed.
That statement makes no sense whatsoever, Mike. What do you mean you're not inclined towards getting tattooed? If that's what you call getting your cutie marks.
Twilight noticed that the light overhead had suddenly changed. The red circle had gone dark. Instead, a different circle was glowing green. Mike started the truck moving forward again.
Is Mike moving the truck according to those lights overhead?
A part of her brain questioned.
Well, Twilight, I'm perfectly happy with my unadorned body. Besides, getting a tattoo is said to be painful and carries with it a risk of contracting some nasty infection or disease.
Mike's statement gave Twilight pause.
Painful? Risk of disease? What? What exactly are you talking about, Mike? Are we even talking about the same thing? This discussion feels a bit like the one we had on cosmology.
What do you mean, Twilight? I was just saying that I didn't want to get a... What did you call it? QT mark?
That's exactly it, Mike. From what you said, I don't think a cutie mark and a tattoo are the same thing at all. What exactly is this tattoo thing you mentioned?
Mike gave her a startled glance. Coincidentally, Twilight felt the truck swerve slightly.
Perhaps I should have asked Mike to stop the truck, like he did last night. I'm starting to see how a distraction can cause problems.
Mike must have felt the truck swerve as well, because he quickly turned his attention back to the road.
A tattoo, Twilight, is a process whereby ink is injected subcutaneously under the skin. It involves hundreds, thousands of closely spaced needle pricks which pierce the skin and drag colored ink below the skin's surface. When completed, an image has been embedded into the subject's skin. It's a painful process and infections are a common occurrence. Unscrupulous tattoo artists who do not properly sterilize their equipment have been known to spread threatening diseases from client to client.
Twilight shuddered.
Thousands of pricks with a needle? Ugh, why would any pony subject themselves to that?
She asked plaintively.
Well, it's called body art. People use it to express themselves and send nonverbal signals through the use of imagery. Teenagers especially get tattoos in the mistaken belief that it will help them define themselves.
Body art? Imagery to send nonverbal signals? Wait, you said earlier that you thought my cutie mark was body art. What exactly did you think it meant?
Twilight was curious as to how Mike viewed her.
Well, to tell you the truth, Twilight, I thought it was an attempt to attract the attention of the opposite gender. Hey, look at my cute flanks. Or his haunches, the prop.
What?
Twilight shrieked in mortification. The truck swerved again as her outburst startled Mike. Fortunately, he was bringing the truck to a stop in front of another red light at the time. Twilight could feel her entire face burning with the heat of a massive flush. Looking over at Mike, she saw that he appeared surprised at her reaction.
Mike, that is not what my cutie mark means.
I'm sorry,
he began to say, but Twilight trampled over his words as she continued talking.
A cutie mark appears on a pony's flank when he or she discovers that certain something which makes them different from every other pony.
Twilight quoted from a well-known speech given by Princess Celestia some 432 years previous. The speech was so famous that it had even become part of the school curriculum on Cutie Marks. Twilight continued, adding her own thoughts.
A cutie mark shows every pony that you have found your path in life. For some, that may be finding that you have a special talent or skill, like my friend Rainbow Dash, who is probably the fastest pony in all of Equestria. For others, it may show that they have found that place where they need to be, like my friend Applejack, who runs Sweet Apple Acres, and devotes herself to making it a thriving business. Sometimes, a cutie mark may show that a pony possesses a special character attribute, like my friend Pinky, who has a buoyant and light-hearted attitude. Her greatest desire in life is to see every pony smile. The light is green.
Twilight paused in the middle of her rant to remind Mike, pointing up at the mysterious device overhead. He had gotten so focused on her little speech that he appeared to have forgotten where they were.
Oh, right. Thanks, Twilight,
Mike said, even as the truck started moving forward again. Twilight noted that there was now another vehicle following behind them.
I'm sorry for having made assumptions about you, Twilight. That was highly inappropriate on my part.
I think I'll forgive him that comment about my cutie mark. He didn't know what it was, and he does pay such good attention to what I am saying. I like that about Mike.
Mike spoke again.
So I gather that this QT mark carries a great deal of significance in your society. How are they applied? Is the process similar in any way to our tattoos?
You're making assumptions again, Mike. A cutie mark is magical. It suddenly appears when a pony discovers that certain something in them. It's nothing like your tattoos. It is neither chosen by the recipient, nor is it given by any other pony. It simply appears.
Wow. So you are saying that every pony discovers something special about themselves, and that they get one of those marks to show it. All I can say is that we humans have nothing like it. We just muddle through life, not knowing if what we are doing is the best thing or not.
Twilight was shocked at what Mike was implying.
Did he live in a society where no one knew what made them unique? Yes, Mike. Every pony has their cutie mark. So, when you told me earlier that you don't have any particular talent?
I mean just that, Twilight. Oh, there are some people who are born with a fantastic aptitude in some endeavor, such as music or sports or even socializing. But most people are just ordinary beings without any special aptitude for anything at all. Speaking of aptitudes, I suppose I do have one. I discovered that I loved reading at quite an early age, but so have many others. It's nothing which makes me unique. No, we humans spend years in school developing our general knowledge, and perhaps practicing some skills we may have chosen to acquire.
Twilight noted that they drove straight past another one of those funny overhead lights. It was showing green, however.
The truly sad part, Twilight, is that we sometimes don't discover that we have made a mistake in our choices until years have passed by, and by then it's often too late. It is often too expensive both in terms of time and money to learn a different skill set.
That's so sad. To waste a part of your life chasing after a path in life, only to find out that you're on the wrong path.
Twilight blinked her eyes, surprised to discover that a few tears had found their way into them. She looked over at Mike.
What about you, Mike? What skills have you learned? Have you found your path in life?
Mike did not answer immediately. Twilight was hesitant to press him for an answer. The silence dragged out. Eventually, the human spoke.
I don't know, Twilight. I drifted through several subjects when I was going to university. I started out hoping to become a scientist. Eventually ended up with a degree as an electrical engineer. But it was difficult to find work in my chosen field, so I ended up taking a job as a computer programmer. It's funny, though. Even though I ended up in a field that's vastly different from where I first saw myself as being, I do enjoy the work. Maybe, by chance, I have found my path in life. And then again, maybe I haven't. It's just something that I don't find too objectionable.
Twilight simply did not know what to make of Mike's statement.
He has no cutie mark, and he does not even know if he's even found his path in life. How can anyone live that way?
Twilight found herself growing frustrated at how little she could do about Mike's situation.
I think it's time to change the subject. What's your job like? You said you were a computer programmer? Ah, that phrase makes absolutely no sense. I thought you said that computers cannot comprehend speech. But your job involves promoting grammar to computers?
Mike laughed.
The word is programmer, which is a word for a person who writes programs.
Oh, like those programs you had on your computer. Well, that makes a lot more sense.
Twilight was smitten by curiosity.
What's it like? Writing programs, I mean. You said you like doing it.
Yes, I do. I find it simultaneously both stimulating and relaxing. The stimulating part comes when you do the analysis and design for the new program, making sure you have identified all the program requirements. During the design phase, you might get to address difficult and obscure data management problems, as you attempt to find effective and elegant solutions. Sometimes you might spend days thinking about some problem. The flash of insight, when it comes, is so rewarding it makes me feel like singing and dancing right then and there.
Twilight smiled, imagining Mike doing just that. She noted that they had passed several more green lights.
Then, after all the analysis and design work, comes the days and weeks of coding. I find this to be the relaxing part, where you turn your intellectual creativity into tangible software.
Twilight frowned.
Software? What's that?
Mike continued.
Day by day, the program grows, pieces being added to it as you write the code for its component parts. Each part needs to be tested. If some part is not working the way you envisioned it, you make revisions to the code and soon it starts working as expected.
Suddenly, Twilight saw the light they were approaching turn yellow. Mike began slowing down the truck. Within a few seconds, the light had turned red. The truck was now stopped in the leftmost lane. Mike smiled.
You know, Twilight, I enjoy the coding so much that I have a little fantasy I indulge in. I imagine myself as being a modern-day equivalent to an old-style blacksmith who stands in front of his forge, hammering away at his metal, shaping it into the form he desires. But in my fantasy, the forge is my computer, and instead of metal, I'm hammering on the software. If something about the software is not correct, I edit it, which is metaphorically akin to whacking it with my hammer.
Twilight listened with interest to Mike's metaphor. She was also observing a steady stream of vehicles crossing the road in front of them. Looking to the side, she noticed that the cross traffic had their own set of lights, and that theirs were green. Suddenly the red and green lights made sense to Twilight.
Finally, at the end of the project, you get to reveal your intellectual child, and watch proudly as it metaphorically takes its first few steps.
It sounds to me like Mike has found his path in life, even if he doesn't have a cutie mark.
She felt happy for him.
It sounds like you are really enjoying your work, Mike,
Twilight stated with a smile.
Though you used a word I did not understand. What is software?
As Twilight waited for Mike's answer, she watched avidly. As the cross-traffic's light turned yellow, she noted that some of the traffic immediately slowed down and came to a stop, while other vehicles appeared to speed up. Some of them did not make it through before their light became red.
Now that's just wrong,
she thought.
The red light means they should be stopped, and I see that our light is now green. Something bad could have happened. Why is Mike not concerned?
Software, a word used to describe the body of instructions that a computer performs. In other words, a program. You can think of the hardware as the physical part of the computer and the software as the program or programs the computer is running. But I like to think of it this way. Hardware is a word which describes a physical, tangible object, and software is a word used to describe tangible objects, the programs, which are not actually physically present.
Mike had advanced his truck into the intersection, but waited for the oncoming vehicles to pass, before turning left.
I think there's something wrong with your explanation,
Twilight argued.
Tangible means something perceivable by touch. If it's not physically present, it can't be touched.
I see what you mean. However, in a computer, a body of data can be properly thought of as an object. Would you be willing to stretch your definition of tangible object to include touching and manipulating that object by means of a mouse pointer?
I see. Software.
Twilight considered the word, realizing now that it was one single word.
I think I like that word. A name for the parts of the machine, the programs, which are tangible yet are without physical existence.
She wrote down the new information in her notebook. The rest of the drive was silent. Twilight entertained herself by trying to puzzle out the meaning of the various roadside signs. A few minutes later, they had apparently reached their destination. Twilight looked out upon a sea of carriages as Mike drove slowly through their ranks. The sheer number of carriages, and the occasional truck, implied to her the presence of humans. Lots of humans. It made Twilight feel uneasy to be in the vicinity of so many carnivores.
There's no reason I should be feeling nervous. There's no way they are going to see through my disguise. Take deep breaths. Calm down.
Twilight quietly began the calming exercises that Cadence had taught her.
Why are you driving in circles?
She asked in an effort to distract herself from her feelings.
I'm looking for a place where I can park my truck. But it looks like we arrived too late in the day.
Why are there so many of these carriages here? Is this normal?
She asked, again prompted by her feelings of uneasiness.
No, Twilight, this situation is not normal. All these cars are here because everybody is trying to get in their last-minute shopping before Christmas. I was afraid this would happen.
They're called cars. The not trucks are called cars.
Twilight shifted her focus onto that tidbit of information.
I wonder if car is short for carriage.
I think I see a spot!
Mike crowed out suddenly. The truck accelerated sharply. Even as she felt herself being pressed back into the seat, Twilight noticed that another car was rapidly approaching from the other direction. Apparently, it too had designs on the same parking spot. It was plain to Twilight that the other car would arrive at the same time as Mike. Unhappily, she realized that she was caught in the middle of a contention over a parking space.
Humans are carnivores after all, and carnivores will fight over scraps.
Twilight prepared herself for the worst. Her feelings of uneasiness intensified. Twilight was pleasantly surprised, however, when Mike brought his truck to a stop, graciously allowing the other car to reach the parking space first. It was plain to Twilight that the other car had made no such concession, continuing its race forward to claim the prize.
Why did you stop?
Twilight asked, observing the other car slow down abruptly as it finally reached the parking spot.
I let him have it. I saw that we would both have reached it at the same time, and from there we would only have argued.
They observed the car ahead of them as it slowly turned into the parking spot. Mike continued.
I find it better to spend my time searching for another spot, rather than engage in a fruitless argument. What is that guy doing?
The source of Mike's exasperation was apparent as they watched the other vehicle repeatedly back out of the parking spot and then attempt to re-enter it again. On each attempt, the other vehicle was only able to enter the parking spot halfway.
I think the parking spot is too small for him. But he's either not too bright or he's very stubborn.
Mike commented on the scene in front of them.
I think Mike handled this situation perfectly, avoiding conflict and acting peacefully.
Twilight was looking thoughtfully at Mike. His actions had left her feeling calm and relieved.
He doesn't behave like a carnivore at all. I think I feel safe with him, and I shouldn't have any worries about being around other humans.
Eventually, the driver of the other vehicle came to the same conclusion about the parking spot Mike had reached a full minute earlier. The other car backed out for the final time, aligned itself with the parking lane, and shot forward with an audible squeal of its tires, accelerating rapidly towards them. The driver was revealed to be a jowly woman with flaming red hair. Her face held an angry expression, and she was apparently shouting something at them. She held up a clenched fist, out of which emerged a lone finger.
I wonder what she was doing with her hand. Was it some form of greeting between passing vehicles? Probably not. She seemed angry. Why was she so angry at us?
Twilight asked in a small voice. with her ears folded back. Twilight was rather sensitive to outbursts of anger. Mike started moving the truck forwards.
That Twilight was an example of a selfish and childish individual, always ready to blame anyone but themselves for their own shortcomings. Instead of admitting to her mistake, she found some way to lay the blame and her anger upon us.
Mike replied, even as his attention was drawn towards the abandoned parking spot.
It's quite easy to see that parking spot is too small for either of our vehicles. She should have recognized that immediately, and not even bothered trying to park there.
As they drove slowly past, Twilight looked at the parking spot. Where each vehicle should have parked neatly between the two lines, one of the adjoining cars had parked itself diagonally, intruding a good 2 feet into the empty parking spot. The car on the opposite side, though it was parked straight, was parked right up against the line separating it from the empty spot.
Wait!
Twilight called out.
I'm sure we can park there.
Now, Twilight, I just told you that space is too small for my truck.
Please, Mike, just hear me out,
she pleaded.
I can move those 2 cars and make plenty of room for your truck.
What? That's not possible, Twilight. Those cars weigh up to 2 tons, each.
Mike's voice was a little loud, suggesting he was alarmed by her suggestion.
That's not really a problem, Mike. I can do it. Do you trust me?
She asked. That last question silenced Mike's protestations. When he spoke again, it was with a much quieter voice.
Are you sure, Twilight? Can you really do this? I wouldn't want you to strain yourself.
Trust me, I've handled much heavier objects in those cars. It's just the truth,
she thought.
Though I hope Mike doesn't think I'm boasting.
All right, Twilight. Let me just move the truck back a bit to give you a better view.
Mike put the truck in reverse and backed them up until they had a good view of the parking space through the front window. Mike made a show of looking around.
Okay, I don't see anybody around here. Do your thing, Twilight.
Twilight immediately began to focus her magic upon the 2 cars. A bright light shone forth from her horn, and her brow furrowed as she brought forth and maintained an intense concentration of magic. The familiar rosy glow surrounded both vehicles as they rose about 2 hooves into the air. Twilight was surprised when the wheels protruded downwards from the vehicles, allowing them to maintain firm contact with the ground. She focused a little harder, increasing magic's concentration and its gradient, which resulted in both vehicles being lifted up by another 2 hooves. She was rewarded with the sight of 2 cars floating in midair, their wheels dangling limply. Twilight could hear Mike's hiss as he drew in a breath. She didn't hear him exhale.
I knew I could lift those cars, but this is much easier than I expected. It's hardly an effort at all. Maybe it's because I'm an alicorn now.
Slowly, because the cars had a lot of mass, and she did not want to give them any troublesome momentum, Twilight moved the cars into their proper position between the white lines and lowered them back down to the ground. The breath Mike had been holding in was suddenly released in one explosive exhale. In an instant, Mike began moving his truck. It took mere seconds for the truck to slip into the just-cleared parking spot in one smooth motion.
That was amazing! Woohoo!
He shouted, startling Twilight.
I've always wanted to put one of those ignorant parkers in their place. That's showing 'em, Twilight.
He turned to her with a broad grin on his face. A matching smile formed on her face as well.
I guess I literally put them in their place, didn't I?
You sure did. And you probably saved us about half an hour of searching. Come on, let's go shopping.
As they came away from the truck, a car passed them by. It was the same jowly woman from before, still searching for her own parking spot. The sight of their truck, neatly parked in the same spot that she had been forced to abandon earlier, was apparently too much for her. She was gesticulating wildly, and they could hear muffled screaming coming from the inside of her car as she hurriedly drove past.
Mike, she did that gesture again, the one with the finger. What does it mean?
Trust me, Twilight, you don't want to know that.
Oh,
Twilight reconsidered her speculations about the gesture.
was it something rude?
Very. Let's just leave it at that. I'm sorry for the long walk, Twilight. It's just that it was not possible to park any closer to the store.
Long walk? Mike thinks this is a long walk? I walk farther to get to the market in Ponyville every day.
She mused.
It's not a problem, Mike. I'm used to taking much longer strolls than this every day. In fact, if I sit around your house much longer, I will need to start exercising.
Exercising?
Mike replied.
I could deal with a bit of that myself.
He patted his abdomen a few times.
Though this is a really bad season for outdoor activities. This time of the year, we humans mostly find ways to exercise indoors.
I wouldn't mind at all if you came with me for some walks, Mike.
Twilight was a little surprised at herself. She wasn't sure where that statement had come from.
Not making any promises, Twilight, but I think I would like that,
he replied.
I had better shut up before I surprise myself again,
was Twilight's thought to herself. They finally approached the entrance to something which labeled itself as a superstore. Twilight was slightly apprehensive as she observed the growing numbers of humans. Some were entering the building. Others were making their way out, pushing strange carts in front of themselves. Mike made his way inside, Twilight following closely behind. She observed with interest how the doors opened of their own accord as they approached. It almost seemed as if someone were using magic to open the doors for them, though she knew from Mike's statements that humans had no magic. Mike had procured one of the strange carts from a large alcove off to the side of the door. Twilight hastened to follow him as he made his way through a second set of magic doors. After passing through the doors, Mike made his way over to a clear space, off to the side. As she came through the doors, Twilight was stunned by all the sights, smells, and noises which assaulted her senses. The milling humans, each one pushing a cart, made her feel much more anxious.
Excuse me, would you mind not standing in the doorway?
The voice of a polite older mare pushing a laden cart towards the doorway helped Twilight come out of her stunned daze.
Sorry,
Twilight exclaimed, flashing an apologetic smile at the mare. Quickly, she walked over to where Mike was waiting. She started her deep breathing exercises, attempting to regain her calm.
What's wrong, Twilight? You appear to be disturbed.
it's so busy in here. All these humans, their voices, smells. It's quite overwhelming.
She took a long sniff and grimaced.
I smell blood too. There's meat in here, isn't there?
Unfortunately, yes. But I planned our route to avoid those sections, so at least you won't have to look at any of it. Is that acceptable, Twilight?
Yes, I think I can manage. The smell is not too strong. Do you mind if I stay close, Mike? All these humans, carnivores, make me uneasy.
Mike appeared surprised at her statement.
Of course you can, Twilight, if it makes you feel better. But you shouldn't be afraid of people in that way. Even if you were here without your disguise, probably not a single one of these people would dream of attacking you. And they certainly would not have any interest in eating you. In reality, you would probably start a mass panic and they would all run away screaming.
Really? They would run away screaming?
Twilight's expression was one of dry disbelief.
Seriously, most of these people would be thinking and screaming, "Help! There's a wild animal loose in the store! Somebody do something!" Some few of the children, not having learned caution about animals, would be going,
Mommy, I want to see a doggy.
or pony, or whatever they think you are. Twilight frowned, trying to imagine such a reaction from all these humans.
I'll have to admit, that's pretty much how us ponies would react if a strange animal suddenly appeared.
Twilight thought. Mike continued.
But here's the real danger. Eventually the police would arrive in response to the commotion, and they would be obligated to do something. The most likely scenario I can imagine is that you are captured and sequestered by the authorities for a scientific study.
The police?
Twilight asked nervously.
That's the name we use for our officers of the peace. People who are charged with the duty of maintaining law and order.
They sound like Celestia's guards.
And they do deserve our respect. But in your case, Twilight, they would be more or less duty-bound to capture you and remove you from the public. All in the interest of preserving peace.
I see.
She said uneasily. She shuffled closer to Mike, unconsciously seeking the comfort of a friend. Mike stooped down suddenly and wrapped his arms around her, giving her a brief hug about her shoulders.
Don't worry, Twilight. I'll keep you from getting into trouble.
He whispered from somewhere near her left ear. The hug, brief as it had been, was just what she needed. Twilight could feel herself growing calmer again.
Thanks, Mike. So, shouldn't we be trying to find some food?
She asked.
Right. Well, Twilight, my plan is to avoid the far back wall of the store. That's where most of the meat is kept. I imagine you would not want to see any of that. So, along this wall and among those stands is where the fresh produce is kept. We'll start here.
2 hours later, Mike and Twilight came out of the so-called superstore. Mike was pushing a cart well laden with groceries in front of him.
Please tell me you don't have to go through all of that every time you need to get some food,
Twilight grumbled to Mike.
I'm sorry about that, Twilight. I certainly didn't enjoy waiting over an hour in line, any more than you did. And no, normally it's a much faster experience.
It had taken them nearly an hour to locate every item, or a suitable substitute, on their shopping list. Mike was unfamiliar with many of the items necessitated by the new vegetarian menu, and they had spent a great deal of time searching through the aisles for them. Added to that was the problem of avoiding the blatant displays of meat in certain sections of the store. At several points, in an effort to save time, Twilight had bravely volunteered to walk amongst the aisles of the dead. But Mike steadfastly declined her offers. He had seen how even the sight of a single package of meat in another shopper's cart had upset Twilight greatly. The real delay had been due to another series of unfortunate events. First, as explained by their frazzled cashier, nearly a third of their staff had not shown up for work due to the aftereffects of the ice storm. Next, the store had suffered a server failure, causing massive confusion at the checkout counters. For nearly half an hour, the scanners were offline. In all probability, the one person who looked after the computers had not made it in due to the ice storm. And lastly, it was the Christmas rush. Throwing nearly 3 times as many customers as were normally expected into this situation was a recipe for disaster. As they began their trek back to the truck, Twilight commented to Mike,
I'm glad that's all over with. Shopping is much easier in Ponyville.
Sorry to break the news to you like this, Twilight, but we're not finished with all our shopping.
What?
Twilight didn't quite shout her response, but it was close.
But it's for you, Twilight.
Mike's rebuttal left her confused.
How do you figure that, Mike? I don't need anything.
Well, I've noticed that your notebook is getting pretty full.
Oh my gosh, it's 2/3 full already, and I just started filling it this morning.
Twilight felt a thrill of alarm coursing through her veins.
I had to get more notebooks. Why, yes, it's getting full.
Twilight's calm response belied her inner agitation.
It was certainly very thoughtful of you to notice that I needed more notebooks. If we have to do more shopping, I'll be happy to come with you,
Twilight said with a smile. In reality, she was falling over herself to ensure she had a steady supply of notebooks.
Where exactly do we need to go?
She asked in a coy manner.
Well, the best place to get them is Staples, a store which sells office supplies and stationery. But it's located at the other end of the shopping mall.
They finally arrived at Mike's truck, and it took but a few moments to load the bags of groceries into the truck's rear seating area, especially with the aid of Twilight's magic.
Are we going to take the truck to the other store?
She asked.
On any normal day I would, but you saw how difficult it was getting this parking spot? No, I plan on walking there. Come on. First thing we have to do is return this cart.
Twilight trotted up alongside Mike. Together they headed back to the grocery store. The prospect of a long walk did not bother her, but the silence did.
Mike, I asked you before if you could tell me about yourself. but we never finished that conversation. Could we maybe return to that topic?
I've told you before, Twilight, that my life is a boring subject.
How can you possibly say that? How can any person possibly think that their life is boring?
Twilight, in my entire life, no one has ever asked me for my story. And you know why? It's because I'm boring. I'm so boring that people even avoid me.
Mike sounded sad and slightly angry.
Well, I'm not a people. I'm a pony. And I am asking you because I am interested. Please, won't you tell me a little about yourself?
Mike seemed to be debating with himself whether he should tell his story. Twilight recalled something he had said the previous day.
You said that you grew up on a farm. Why don't you start by telling me about that?
It wasn't a real farm, more like a hobby farm,
Mike returned.
A hobby farm?
She asked. Yeah, the name pretty much describes it. My parents bought a small farm to indulge themselves in the pastoral life. Perhaps they were nostalgic for the simpler life they experienced when they were children. Perhaps they did it for economic reasons. Some things my father said led me to believe that jobs were scarce during that time. One thing you can say about living on a farm is that there's always plenty of food, if you're willing to work for it. Regardless of why exactly they came to do it, we found ourselves living on a hobby farm. Nothing we had was sufficient to make the farm economically viable. We had 50 acres, 4 cows, 2 pigs, 2 dogs, and numerous cats. For a while, we even had a small herd of 4 sheep. But my dad got rid of them after the first spring.
Got rid of them? You don't mean...
Twilight was suddenly apprehensive over the fate of the sheep.
It was nothing bad, Twilight. My dad simply sold them to another farmer. The sheep had a tendency to destroy their pasture by grazing it too closely. With the pasture half devastated, we had to spend money to buy extra fodder for the other animals. And then when the sheep needed to be sheared, let's just say it cost more to get a sheep shearer to come in and do the job than the wool from the poor sheep was worth. I remember my dad was really upset about that.
Mike wore a tiny smile as he remembered that detail. By now, Mike had returned the grocery cart, and they had walked a ways past the entrance of the superstore. Twilight could see that they were approaching another doorway where numerous humans could be seen entering and exiting.
The point was, we had insufficient land for raising more than a tiny handful of animals. It wasn't enough to make the farm economically viable. But the animals and the apple orchard and the garden were an enormous help towards making our family self-sufficient in food.
An apple orchard? You grew apples?
Twilight was wide-eyed, astonished at the mention of an apple orchard. It reminded her strongly of her friend Applejack.
If you can call a mere 20 trees an orchard. Half of those trees had grown too old. They were large and full of gnarled and dying branches. I remember my dad cutting them down and pulling the stumps up with the little tractor we had. Then he planted new trees in their place.
It sounds like you enjoyed your life on the farm.
Twilight commented as they entered through the doors.
This is not a store,
Twilight observed.
It's more like a passageway in Princess Celestia's castle. Only it's very broad and very plain.
No, I hated it.
Mike surprised Twilight with his answer.
In my Cali youth, I resented all the chores my parents had me do, especially the gardening. Do you know how disgusting tomato hornworms and potato beetles are? Every day I had to go out and pull them off the plants. Every day. Ugh.
Mike shuddered dramatically.
When I was 13, we moved away from the farm and back into the city. I vowed I would never do those chores ever again.
Suddenly, they came to the end of the short passage and found themselves in what Twilight could only describe as a market, except it was indoors. Mike had turned left as they entered a very broad passageway. Twilight could see both sides of the passageway were lined with shops. But what Twilight noticed above all else were the humans. There were masses and masses of humans walking up and down the length of the passageway. They walked singly, but sometimes they came in groups, chatting amiably amongst themselves. Some walked slowly, checking out the storefront displays, and others walked quickly, determined to get to their destination with as little delay as possible. And they were all carnivores.
They won't attack me, and I believe what Mike told me. How they would be afraid of me if they saw me, but I just can't help it. I feel like a foal surrounded by timber wolves.
Twilight could feel her unease growing by leaps and bounds. In short order, she was pushing Cadence's breathing exercises for all they were worth. She started falling behind Mike. Before she knew what was happening, she found that she had unconsciously drifted up against the bole of a potted tree that was set in the center of the passageway. She huddled there, trying to appear small, trying to regain control of her emotions.
This is silly. I'm being irrational.
Twilight shouted internally at herself, attempting to reason her way out of her anxiety.
These humans won't harm me. Just like Mike wouldn't harm me.
Thinking about Mike suddenly made her realize that he was absent.
Where's Mike?
She thought.
How could he leave me here all alone?
A whimper escaped from her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut. Upon opening them again, she saw one of the humans was suddenly right there in front of her. Twilight's eyes dilated in shock and surprise. Her ears folded back, and she shied away from the intruder.
Twilight!
The intruder called out quickly, and suddenly she realized it was Mike, squatting in front of her. Her relief was so palpable that she lunged forward and threw her forelegs around him in a hug.
Mike!
She called out happily.
I'm so glad you didn't leave me.
You should know. I would never do that.
Mike was speaking in a strange manner, making a funny wheezing noise between every few words. But it didn't matter. Twilight could feel her anxiety melting away in the presence of her friend. She hugged him even more tightly for the sheer joy of it.
Twilight! Don't die!
Mike's voice was definitely degrading. She could barely make out those last few words. Suddenly, the words' meaning worked their way to the forefront of her mind.
I'm hurting him. I didn't mean to hurt him.
Those thoughts coursed through her mind, even as she released her tight grip.
Sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Are you all right, Mike?
She asked. Mike winced and took a deep breath before answering.
Oh! I can't believe how strong you are.
Accompanying those words was a friendly smile, mitigating any damage they might have wrought. Twilight smiled back, having forgotten for the moment the masses of humans passing by on all sides.
I take it that means you are all right then? Well, this is a surprise. Mike's more than twice my size. How is it that he's so fragile?
She thought to herself.
I'll have to try and remember that so I don't hurt him in the future.
Mike rose from his squatting position.
Never mind about me. How about you, Twilight? I was walking along when suddenly I discovered that you were missing. Fortunately, I found you nearby, but it looked like you were having a really bad time. You didn't even see me approaching.
Twilight's ears drooped back, and she looked aside.
I'm just really nervous around all these humans, Mike. These carnivores.
She finished in a small voice.
Well, Twilight, you need to stop thinking of them as carnivores, because that's wrong. Whenever you do that, you also associate us with the concept of predators, and I assure you that these people are not predators. They are omnivores. Why don't you start thinking of them as people instead? That's a word for intelligent and reasonable beings who would happily sit down with you to enjoy a salad meal. By that definition, I'm a person, you're a person, and they're all persons.
Mike waved his arm towards the passing humans.
Together, collectively, we are all of us people.
Twilight looked into Mike's face.
Have I been frightening myself with a word? Have I been projecting my fear of predators onto all these people? I'll try to do that, Mike. But in the meantime, could I walk closer to you? I'd feel better if you were nearby.
Sure thing, Twilight. I don't mind.
Mike stepped close and put a hand on her shoulder.
I could even hold you like this as we walked.
I don't think that would be necessary.
She replied, afraid to show Mike exactly how uneasy the crowd made her feel.
Oh, who am I kidding? These crowds make me really uneasy, and I should accept Mike's offer.
Suit yourself.
Mike began to reply, pulling his hand away. But Twilight interrupted him.
On second thought, maybe we could try that. You holding me, that is, for a little while, until I can learn to relax around these people.
Twilight attempted to communicate her reconsideration without appearing to be desperate.
Of course, Twilight. Come on. We still have a good ways to go.
Twilight found Mike's close presence to be quite calming. His hand on her shoulder felt somewhat like a friendly nuzzle. Under Mike's friendly hand, Twilight was able to lower her anxiety to the point where she could view the humans more objectively and began to practice thinking of them as persons and people.
Mike's right. I do need to change my mental viewpoint. These humans are people, not predators. People. What a funny word.
Just then she noticed a sign that read, People's Jewelers, on one of the storefronts.
People? People's?
A sudden thought struck her.
I wonder. Mike?
Yes, Twilight?
Mike halted their forward progress.
I saw a sign back there. The name of that jewelry store. Is that how you spell the word people?
Mike turned around and attempted to see the store in question through the milling crowd. As he did so, he let go of her shoulder. When his hand left her shoulder, Twilight was both pleased to discover that the presence of the crowds of humans no longer seemed to bother her so much, and saddened by the loss of Mike's touch.
You mean the People's Jewelry Store? Yes, Twilight, that's how we spell the word people.
Suddenly he grinned at her.
Why? What strange phonetic spelling have you been thinking of up till now?
Never you mind.
She replied emphatically, pulling his hand back onto her shoulder with her magic, and giving him a gentle push to get moving again, back in the direction they had been traveling.
It's simply to distract him from that question. Yes, that's why I have him holding my shoulder. Not that I need it anymore.
She told herself equally emphatically. Soon they had arrived at the store Mike had been seeking. Twilight thought it had a very strange name for an office supply store.
Staples might be an appropriate name for a food store, for selling staple foods. But for office supplies, it makes no sense.
Mike led the way past multiple aisles, filled with all manner of items. Twilight never imagined that any office could possibly need so many different things. Soon they found the notebooks. Twilight was amazed at the sheer variety of colors and styles the notebooks came in. She felt like a filly in a candy store, as she lifted up a sample of every type of notebook with her magic. Mike waited patiently as she compared the notebooks.
It's so hard to decide. I like the wire type I've been using because I'm able to record my observations serially. But this other kind of wire notebook has 5 built-in dividers, allowing me to easily organize my notes and observations by subject.
Finally, reluctantly, she settled on 3 notebooks of the type she had already been using. She hoped that she could convince Mike she needed that many. She would probably use 1 per day.
Only 3?
Mike asked, surprise evident in his voice.
I would have thought the way you write that you would need a lot more than that.
You mean I can get more?
She asked eagerly.
Sure, get 10 or 12 if you want. If you don't use them, then I'm sure I can eventually find use for them,
was his nonchalant reply.
Eee!
She let out a squeal of excitement.
Thank you, Mike.
In mere moments, she had 6 of each type, in a broad selection of colors.
Here, I think we could use a few of these as well.
Mike added some writing pads to her collection.
Why do I need these?
She asked.
I have plenty of notebooks with these lovely spring bindings.
These writing pads have detachable sheets of paper. I find that they're good for just scribbling out your rough thoughts and ideas, and then throwing away your rejects. They're also good for writing notes and letters. Simply detach the page the note is on and send it.
Okay. I can see how that would be useful.
Twilight agreed. Suddenly, she changed the subject.
What about this pen, Mike? Do you think it will last through all these notebooks?
Let me see,
he said, reaching for the pen. Twilight floated it over to him. With a deft motion of his versatile fingers, he unscrewed the silvery tip of the pen. The interior components displayed themselves. Up until that point, she had not considered the internal workings of the pen she had been using. She found it a fascinating sight.
See this plastic tube here?
Mike pointed a finger on the offending object.
This holds the ink. When new, the ink is filled up to here.
He indicated a point near the end of the tube, where Twilight could see a faint demarcation of cloudiness.
But as you can see, the ink has almost all disappeared.
His finger now indicated the dark substance remaining at the other end of the tube.
So it's nearly out of ink,
she replied glumly, her ears dropping down a bit.
Looks like it. So, while we're here, we should get some refills for it.
He looked at the stack of notepads she was levitating alongside her.
Lots of refills.
Twilight squealed for joy when she saw the selection of pens. The walk back was uneventful, though Twilight continued to allow Mike to hold on to her shoulder. In truth, she rather enjoyed the contact and didn't want it to end. It seemed to satisfy something in herself she couldn't quite fathom.
I like this. I don't know why, but I like the feeling of his hand on my shoulder. It's a little bit like being nuzzled. And it also reminds me, just a little, of Spike's weight when he's riding on my haunches.
Buoyed up by her feelings of contentment, Twilight asked Mike to continue his story.
You were saying, Mike, that you hated being on the farm, and that your family moved to the city. Why are you back on the farm now?
I told you, I was a stupid kid.
Kid?
Twilight interrupted.
Are humans related to goats?
Mike smiled back at her.
Child, Twilight. Kid is a slang term for child. At one time its use was considered offensive to many, but now it has become the norm. Even the dictionaries have stopped identifying it as slang terminology.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. You were saying?
I was saying that I was a very selfish and willful child. I would constantly focus on all the chores I disliked so intensely. As a child, I ended up convincing myself that I hated the farm itself. It was only years later that I found myself missing the peaceful quiet and open spaces that were part of my everyday life on the farm. I had been so focused on my dislikes that I totally overlooked the things that I loved about the farm. As I grew older, city life became less and less satisfying. 3 years ago, I contributed into a lottery pool the office employees had set up. They had been playing the game for years, and for once, one of the lottery tickets they had bought won a big prize. There were 16 of us in that pool, and the prize was $18 million. When I received my share of the prize, the very first thing I wanted to do was to buy a farm. I spent a year looking for the right farm. I wanted a place that was not too far away from the city, so I could still work there. Yet I also wanted a farm with lots of space without being too expensive. I spent a whole year looking for the right place. Then I spent another year having the house renovated and adding various other improvements.
So you've only been living in your house for a year now?
Twilight asked, figuring the date from the time he had claimed to have won the lottery prize.
About 13 months now, I'd say.
Mike clarified.
What were those improvements you mentioned?
You've seen most of them. The garage where I park my cars and a new building. Back half of the building is my new workshop. Then there's the emergency power generator and the satellite internet service.
What do you plan to do with your farm?
She asked.
I'm not sure yet. In reality, this is just my hobby farm. I enjoy my work too much to want to quit or retire from it. As for this farm, I might try to plant a small orchard, or even try my hand at cultivating some crops. But mostly, I just want to enjoy having all the open space around me. Whenever I have an urge to build or do something, there are no restrictions which prevent me from doing so.
Their walk had taken them all the way back to the side corridor, where they had entered the covered market. Twilight was so engrossed in Mike's story that she scarcely noticed when they exited the enormous building.
I don't think you told me why your family moved away from the farm in the first place.
Twilight kept digging into Mike's past. Mike drew a breath and let it out as a long sigh.
It was on account of my little sister,
he replied.
You have a little sister?
Twilight was surprised. Nothing Mike had said previously had suggested that he had any siblings.
Wow, Mike is an older brother to his sister, just like Shining is to me. Oh, I'd love to meet her and ask her what she thinks about Mike.
She's gone now, he replied with a sad voice.
What? She's dead? But I never got to meet her.
Twilight was shocked. I was 13 years old when she got sick. I mean, really sick. I remember that in particular because my parents got the news of her illness just 2 days before my 13th birthday. I was supposed to have a big party, and I got so mad when everything fell apart and my sister became the center of attention. I told you that I was a selfish and willful child. I guess you can add shallow to that list.
I'm so sorry for your sister, Mike. You don't have to say anything more if you don't want to,
Twilight responded. She wanted to give him a comforting hug right then and there. It's all right, Twilight. I don't mind. I think the best thing I can do for her now is to remember her. Both the good parts and the bad parts. She was only 10 years old when she got sick. In only 8 months, she was gone.
If you don't mind me asking, what happened to her?
She had leukemia. Acute lymphocytic leukemia was the exact diagnosis. The doctors called it. It's a type of cancer which affects the blood.
Cancer?
Twilight appeared to consider the word.
I don't think I've ever heard of cancer. What is it?
Mike stopped abruptly. You don't know what cancer is? He asked incredulously.
Mike, I just said that.
Twilight spoke gently, still mindful that the true subject at hand was Mike's sister. Cancer is a disease where some cells in the body become abnormal and begin to divide and reproduce uncontrollably, becoming an ever-growing mass of abnormal tissue. These abnormal cells also have a nasty habit of spreading to other parts of the body. Maybe you know of the disease by another name.
Ew.
Twilight suddenly imagined the cancer as being some kind of globular lump growing out of her body.
That disease sounds absolutely horrible, Mike. I'm fairly well read, but I've never heard of anything like that. I could be wrong. Maybe it's known in Equestria, but I think it would have to be a very rare disease indeed.
Twilight paused, puzzled by some of the details Mike had mentioned.
You said this cancer causes the growth of a body of abnormal tissue. How does that work for blood? She didn't fill up with excessive amounts of blood, did she?
I looked it up years later. The cancer is in the marrow of the bones, where new blood cells are formed.
New blood cells are formed inside the bone marrow? I didn't know that. I wonder if it's the same for ponies.
The leukemia starts growing increasing number of non-functional blood cells. Eventually, the dysfunctional cells start to outnumber and crowd out the functional blood cells. At that point, the patient has a variety of life-threatening symptoms. Poor blood clotting and anemia were the two symptoms that plagued my sister the most. They had reached Mike's truck now. Twilight suspended her curiosity while they stowed their purchases and climbed aboard. She kept her silence as they exited the parking lot, waiting until they had returned to the main road and proceeding on their way home again.
Can the disease be treated?
Twilight was burning to ask that question. The standard method of treating leukemia is chemotherapy. Twilight waited to see if Mike would explain the new term. Her patience was rewarded as Mike spoke up again. Chemotherapy is a treatment based on injecting special toxins into the body to destroy the cancer cells.
They treat the patient by poisoning them? That's insane! No, that's sheer criminal stupidity!
Twilight was incensed.
That's absolutely ridiculous! Whoever came up with that treatment should be arrested as a murderer!
She exclaimed heatedly. You might think that, Twilight, but it's not so simple. As far as any medication goes, those cancer cells are indistinguishable from any normal cells. Anything that targets them will also target the normal cells in the body. But cancer cells have one slight vulnerability. They divide much faster than normal cells. So if you administer a toxin which destroys cells which are in the process of dividing, the toxin has a much larger impact on the abnormal cells than it does on the normal cells. So yes, the treatment amounts to slowly poisoning the patient to death. But there is a reasonable hope that the cancer cells will all die off before the patient expires.
Treatment by differential toxicological sensitivity.
Twilight mused out loud.
So, if the cancer cells are sensitive enough, the patient is cured. But if they aren't sensitive enough...
Then the treatment is a failure and the patient is left extremely weakened and feeling so ill that they might despair of life itself. And that's exactly what happened in her case. 4 times they tried the chemotherapy, 4 times she suffered, and 4 times they failed.
Was there no other treatment they could have tried?
Twilight was aggrieved for Mike's sister.
You mentioned that the chemotherapy was the standard treatment.
Her leukemia was simply too aggressive. The doctors tried to find a suitable match for a bone marrow transplant, but she died before they found one.
A bone marrow transplant?
Twilight tried to imagine what that might be, and failed.
It's a process whereby they deliberately destroy the patient's bone marrow. It destroys both the cancer cells as well as the normal cells. Then when they are sure that all the cancer cells are gone, they transplant new bone marrow from a healthy donor into the patient. I gather that it involves some very large needles which penetrate into the marrow of the bone.
It sounds so simple, so elegant. Except for killing the bone marrow. And the large needles. No pony likes needles. That's so simple. So direct. Why didn't they do that in the first place?
With the bone marrow, you also acquire a copy of the donor's immune system. If the donor does not exactly match to the recipient, the new blood will attack and begin killing every cell in the recipient's body. That's called graft versus host disease.
So, despite the doctor's best efforts, they could not save your sister. How did that affect you?
When she first became ill, Twilight, I was an absolute monster. I was angry at how she had turned everyone's life upside down. And even though I hated the farm, I was angry that our parents sold it so that we could move into a house in the city, closer to the hospital. But it's funny, little by little, I came to realize what my sister meant to me. I came to respect her incredible bravery as she met every trial and endured every treatment, and yet she stayed cheerful. I came to love her as the precious, irreplaceable person that was my only sister.
Mike's voice choked off. Twilight could see tears running down his face. He reached up with his hand to wipe away the tears.
I'm sorry, Twilight. I can't continue.
He rasped out.
I'm so sorry, Mike.
She extended her left wing and touched his shoulder with it.
You really loved her. I can see that. I'm sorry that I never got to meet her. She sounds like an incredible person.
She was. Twilight, she was.
Mike spoke softly. His voice trailed off. They spent the rest of the journey home in silence.